Okay. All right. So, oops. Gosh, I keep moving forward. I'm not ready to do that. Ooh. Okay. Let me just let people into the waiting room. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Janice Jefferis, and my pronouns are she and hers. And my original title for this workshop was "How to Build Your Classroom as a First Year Early Childhood or Preschool Teacher," and I'm still going to talk about that. But I thought that a more accurate title, and I just thought about this today, but I thought a more accurate title is Reflections from My First Year as an Early Childhood Educator. And I'm going to be talking a lot about what I recall and what the lessons that I've learned from my first year as a teacher. But before I begin, I kind of want to give you guys a little introduction about myself so that you know who I am and the positionality that I speak from. And so although I'm a former first year teacher, I've been in the field for I think like, oh gosh, I think this is going to really age me, like 18 years now. And there's just a lot of things that really stick with you. And it's the advice that I give all of the first year teachers who I meet. But my name is Janice Jefferis, and I was really lucky enough to pursue a linear path in education. I knew I wanted to be a teacher from when I was a young girl. And I remember I used to play teacher with my sisters. And I remember telling my parents, like, I want to be a teacher when I grow up. And so I made decisions and I made choices in my life that kind of really took me on that pathway of becoming an educator. I knew I wanted to be a teacher, but I didn't know what type of teacher I wanted to be. And so in community college, I'm a product of the community college environment. I got my AA from Cosumnes River College in, I think it was called child development. Now, every college has their own degree titles, but I think it was in child development, my AST, associate degree to transfer in child development. And I transferred to San Francisco State, where the bulk of my experiential background, in terms of like internships and my jobs took place. And so I earned my BA in child and adolescent development with an emphasis in child and family from San Francisco State. And I was able to kind of learn about the different teaching philosophies and I got a range of experiences working with different age groups, right? And so just I'm going to rewind a little bit back further. I actually had my first job as a before and after school program teacher, and I worked with children kindergarten through sixth grade. I liked it, but I didn't love it. But it was enough to keep me in education. And so it wasn't until I started interning around San Francisco Unified School District preschools where I just was like, you know what? This is the age group for me. Like, I really love preschool age. And so I also kind of figured out who I was. I did a lot of like soul searching, and I learned about the Waldorf, philosophy. I learned about Montessori, and I learned about the project approach, in terms of like, how do you approach curriculum? And so you'll find in your career that you will be inspired by bits and pieces of different philosophies, right? And so I really, really took to, and if you've taken a principles and practices course at your community college, you probably know about the Reggio Emilia approach. And the Reggio Emilia approach to teaching and learning is a very progressive approach, even though it's been around for a long time, but it really is a different way of being with children and thinking about yourself in terms of your identity as an early childhood educator. And so if you don't know about what the Reggio Emilia philosophy is, I really, really implore you to learn more, because it's a really profound philosophy, and it really flips on its head what we know about children and how we perceive our role as early childhood educators. I see a couple of you students who just popped in. Thank you so much for joining. If you haven't yet, please put your first and last name and your email in the chat box. All right. So after I earned my BA at San Francisco State, I went on and I decided to get my master's degree in early childhood education with an emphasis in early childhood special education. And I decided to get a special education credential because I was finding in my practice and in my even just volunteering around different early childhood programs, I would come across a lot of children with suspected special needs or disabilities. And one of the most common types of disabilities that I came across, whether it was diagnosed or not, was it was autism. It was autism, and I believe ADHD, but autism was something a type of disability that I've had a lot of experience with. And so I decided, hey, why not get a credential, right? Because, at that point in my education, I was like, I really don't know where I'm going to take it. And I knew I wanted to work with young children, preschool age children. And then I got my master's degree at Mills College, which is a liberal arts all women's college, which I'm very proud of. But I was able to kind of expand my experiential background. And I worked with infants and toddlers in early intervention. I don't know if you guys heard of Easter Seals, but Easter Seals is a nonprofit agency that provides free in-home therapeutic services for babies, actually for children under 5, but I worked in the early intervention department. And basically I went from home to home all over the Bay Area to provide early intervention services. And what that looked like was therapeutic services. And I was kind of like on the track of becoming a special educator. I was like, you know what, maybe I want to work as a special day teacher in the autism class, right? And so, this particular moment with a parent kind of really changed my mind about it. And I'm going to emphasize throughout this presentation that it's really important. I know you want to work with early childhood, but I can't emphasize the importance of getting a range of experiences working with different age groups, because let's be real. Even though you have your heart and your mindset on working with second graders or even preschoolers, for example, once you get in that classroom, you really won't know, right? And so, volunteer, get some internships, paid internships if you can, just to get a range of experience. I mean, I've worked with high school. I lasted 2 months there because I was like, oh, no, I can't. I look just as young as them. And this was early in my career. And I was like, I can't do high school. But anyway, I remember I was with the lead interventionist. We were doing a home visit for this 2-year-old little girl, and she was on the autism spectrum, and she was very high functioning, but her behaviors were were on the high end of this, or they were very classic to the autism spectrum, and she was nonverbal because she didn't have any expressive communication, right? But she was so intelligent, so smart. And I remember my lead interventionist and I leaving her house, and the mom, and I still kind of get chills and I still get teary-eyed whenever I think about this, because it was just so profound. I remember she stopped us. Her name, my lead interventionist, her name was Annie, and she stopped Annie and I, and the mom said, I don't care if my daughter ever gets a job. I don't care if she ever goes to school. All I want is for her to hear her call me mommy. That's all she wanted. And I had worked with her for, I think, 3 months to get to know her and the family. And you do kind of get attached to the family just because you're emotionally, you just want the best for that child and the family. And just when I was like looking at the moms, I just couldn't take it. And so that's kind of like the day that I decided, I don't think I could come home every night from this job and not be devastated. And so that's when I knew that working in early education and solely in special education wasn't for me. It's important work, but I really believe that there is that every educator, you're meant for a specific age group. And early intervention, working with babies with special needs, toddlers, it wasn't for me. I know that I would come home depressed every night. And I knew high school wasn't for me because I couldn't deal with the attitudes, right? I liked elementary school, but I really found that I really connected and vibed well with the little ones. And it got really specific. I work really well with children between ages 3 to 5. Okay, that's kind of like my forte, my niche. It's and so when I was in grad school, I was like, this is it. This is the age group I want to work with. And so since grad school, I've dedicated the last 10 years of my life, of my career, not my life, my career working with preschool age children and in Reggio inspired programs. So today I'm going to talk about, oh, well, here, let me move forward. Let me move forward in my presentation. Oops. Okay. So this was me. This was me in my last year as an early childhood educator. Okay. And this was, oh gosh, this was back in 2010 or something like that, if I remember correctly. But yeah, it was my last year. And it was my most difficult year out of my most difficult year of teaching was the first 3 years, and then the very last year. So the first 3 years of teaching, and I'm going to get into that, was really hard because I was trying to get a hold of my, hold my bearings. Like I was trying to get used to what the profession is, because in school and a lot of what you guys are doing right now, you're just kind of learning about theory. You're learning about theory. And if you're lucky enough, you've had the experience of the practicum course, right? I know there's a lot of students who don't have that experience right now. And if you are a student who has yet to get practicum experience, I really encourage you, it's okay for everyone to go back to the classroom to really try to get your volunteer experience in, or try to get an entry-level position, working as an assistant teacher. Okay. I see Sabrina's in practicum now. Yeah. Through Zoom. And and I really feel for you guys because, you learn from your experience. And really, I learned a lot from my programs, from my undergrad and my graduate, but there's nothing like learning on the job, because there's really nothing that your professor or instructor can really prepare you for, because early childhood 10 years ago is different now, right? And so it's a lot more science and research based. Not that it wasn't back then, but it's even more heavily now, where there's a heavy focus on social justice, which there should have always been, but now there's a heightened focus. But yeah, so my last year of teaching was hard, and I'll just briefly talk, just tell you why, is because and this is what a lot of people don't tell you, and I certainly wasn't prepared for this in my undergrad and my graduate preparation, is what makes the hard part of your job. Half of the part of your job is working with the parents, and I wasn't ready for that. And so something that I had to really kind of like hone in on, the skill I had to hone in on, was my interpersonal skills to try to resolve conflict and to connect with families, which I'm going to talk about when I talk about relationships. But I found this quote online, and this just hit the nail on the head. Being a new teacher is like trying to fly an airplane while building it. And that was by an educator named Rick Smith. And that's absolutely true.
Janice,
the first 3 years are the hardest, because you're trying to get a hold of your bearings and trying to get used to what the practice is. And it's a lot of trial and error, a lot of, ooh, that didn't work. Like, oh, I would never do that again. Or, oh my gosh, like that really worked, and I'm going to keep that in my toolbox. But it really is a lot of trial and error. And what I want to emphasize, and this is what was not emphasized 10 years ago or even 15 years ago when I first started in the field, was self-care is so important, especially with teachers, because really, and I'm going to get into this when we talk about relationships, but teaching, it's emotional labor. And I'm gonna elaborate more on what I mean about that. Okay, but it really it really is like building a plane or trying to fly a plane while you're building it. So what I'm going to talk about in what I recall my first year of teaching, and I think that the way that I've built this presentation, there's a lot of images there. This is probably, there's 2 or 3 slides with content, like written content, but I'm relying on, I've shared a lot of the documentation and the images that I've taken along in my career that I'm going to share with you. But what I want to first talk about in this presentation is relationships, your relationships with children, families, and your co-teachers. As a first-year teacher, I cannot underestimate the value of prioritizing relationships. It will save you so much stress, so much, adversity in your first 3 years of life if you focus on cultivating, nurturing a positive rapport with the children and the families and your co-teachers, right? And I've heard many teachers talk about relationships in your work as a teacher as kind of like a marriage, right? Especially with your co-teacher, okay? And then I'm going to talk about the classroom environment. And the way that I have it structured in this presentation, the classroom environment in Reggio Emilia, your classroom environment is your curriculum. And that's the same thing in an infant toddler classroom. But in Reggio Emilia, they talk about the classroom environment as a third teacher. And that's part of curriculum, right? It really, and I'm going to get into that. And then I'm going to, I hope if I'm not blabbering off too long, I want to make sure I reserve some time for a Q&A session, because I know that there's going to be a lot of questions about, things that I'm going to share and all that stuff. But I do want to give you a heads up. I am going to share with you, because I feel like there's a lot of students who, they struggle with curriculum, and I want to give an example of a project-based, child-inspired curriculum idea and experience that I facilitated with a group of children 15 years ago. Okay, all right. Oops. All right, so this is a lot of writing, and I'm going to read it to you. And so, relationships with children, they should be your number one priority always. Okay, they should be the reason why you come into this field. And if you're not passionate about what you're doing with any age group you work with, you got to question, am I working with the right age group? Am I doing the right work? Because I care so deeply about my work as an early childhood educator, I did the self-work. And when I say self-work, I really questioned, like, is this what I really want to do? Right. And that's why I made sure that I got, diverse experiences working with different age groups. And like I said earlier, I really implore all of you guys to do that if you can, and if you can, get it paid. But something that every new school year, with every new class, relationships is something that threads throughout, and it's something that I weave throughout the curriculum throughout the entire year. Okay. And so this is an example of something that I wrote in a newsletter for my families to let them know that this is what you have to look forward to, and what your child has to look forward to as their teacher in my, in this class. And so I had a co-teacher named Alma, who is amazing. I wish I could have invited her to come and talk, but I just wanted to share some of the goals that and some of the things that I was going to focus on in the school year with my parents, so that they kind of like knew. And this is what's really important in your relationship building with your families, right? Transparency with what you're doing in the class. Okay. This is what I wrote. This is what Alma and we wrote in our newsletter. It is a proverbial belief in the field of human development that a child's early school experience should focus distinctly on building strong intrapersonal, which means having a positive self-image identity and an attunement to emotions of self and the others, and interpersonal, which is basically getting along with other people, right? And working well with others. So intra and interpersonal intelligence. So that's what I wanted to tell parents that I wanted to focus on. Thus, the academic goals and experiences of children and teachers in Room Haifa reflect an important emphasis on developing strong and healthy social emotional competencies in order to engage intellectually and in meaningful educational experiences. This year, we have worked hard to create a classroom culture that strongly emphasizes our school's Jewish values of Avahah and Kalila and Drash. We believe that this thread of values lay the foundation for children to function as critical thinkers and compassionate citizens. In this particular class, we really focused on empathy, okay? And I'm I wish I had more time to show you about what that documentation looked like. Our hope is that this mindset will remain intrinsic as they continue on as lifelong learners. So what I want to note here is that I weave the theme or the thread of relationships in with quote unquote academic learning. Okay. Because it's just that important. And I even tell my parents at the beginning of the year when we have our parent orientation, if you are expecting me to teach your child ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, their colors and their shapes, I'm probably not the teacher for you. I value social and emotional learning. All of that so-called academic learning, it'll all happen. It may not look like what you think, it typically looks like. It's going to look a lot different because I embed those experiences in the everyday life of our classroom experience, right? In the everyday learning experiences. So this is kind of how my co-teacher and I, Alma, we set up the years. We want to relay to our parents that we care about your child. We go as far as to say, we love your child, right? No matter what, unconditionally. And we show that by putting relationships first. Okay. Oh, wait. All right. So, one of the things that especially the beginning of the school year, and this is something that I always make sure that I communicate to parents, is I want every child to have a friend. And research has found, that children who don't do well academically later on, when they move on to first, second, and third grade, that social emotional component of making friends makes a huge deal to a child's self-esteem and self-confidence. So one of the things that I tell families is my goal for every child in this class is that they make one meaningful friendship, at least one meaningful friendship, and by the time they leave my classroom. And so this is an example of a documentation. And in Reggio Emilia, they use a lot of documentation to kind of like assess, evaluate children's and track children's development and learning. And so I use documentation a lot in my classroom. And in every classroom, it looks different. But if you're going to be working in a Head Start or any type of progressive program, you're going to use documentation. Okay, so this little kid right here, and I'm gonna call it. Well, I guess his name's already here. I think it's here. Okay. Oh, his name is Saul. So this is a little boy named Saul, and Saul had already experienced bullying. Okay, he was almost 5, and he had already experienced bullying for his weight and I think that was the main thing, was for his weight. And I remember when I first met his mom, she came to me in tears, and she felt comfortable enough to do that with me, to come to me, to be transparent, because I had built that trust with her. Okay. And she said, Miss Janice, I got to tell you, Saul doesn't want to come to school because he's being bullied by so-and-so and so-and-so, because they keep calling him names. Right. And I took that very seriously. And so, and I noticed that Saul, and also this is something that his mom told me, that he didn't have any friends. So I noticed that Saul didn't have any friends to play with. And so I said, this is something that I'm going to focus on in my curriculum, is building friendships and nurturing the relationships between and among the children. And so I started doing something called play partners. And play partners is something that I made it a point to assign every morning for Saul. I would say, I would tell the children what we had to do that day. And I say, okay, Saul, today you're going to be paired with so-and-so. You're going to be paired with so-and-so, and you're going to be doing this, right? And I would give them like a learning experience to engage with each other. So, but this particular morning, I paired Saul with this little other child named Trisha. And Trisha, and I was very intentional about who to pair Saul with, right? I wouldn't pair Saul with the bullies, right? So you have to be deliberate in who you pair children with if you're going to do play partners. So I said, because Trisha is very emotionally and socially mature, she was a very well-liked peer. And so I decided Trisha would be perfect for Saul. And so I invited the both of them to start playing with each other every morning for 2 weeks. And eventually Trisha and Saul just really formed this really strong bond, and they began to look for each other every morning. And the mom, Saul's mom, would say, Miss Janice, Saul asked for Trisha all the time. He is so much happier, right? And the reason why is because I was very deliberate in how I was going to approach it. And because I was deliberate in telling families, I value relationships, this is what I'm going to focus on, it wasn't any surprise. And the parents in my class understood that my value, my personal teaching philosophy, is centered around social emotional development. And so this is an example of documentation that I took between Saul and Trisha. So in continuing to focus on our intention of building relationships within the classroom community, the children were given the opportunity to choose experiences that were interesting and supported them in working with other children. Okay, so this is how I was able to help children hone in on their interpersonal skills, right? Experiences that are carefully and intentionally prepared for social learning experiences create the possibility for new friendships to form and for children to find joy in learning together. Trisha and Saul worked side by side at the small manipulatives table, stringing natural materials to display in the environment. After working in silence for 15 minutes, Trisha turned to Janice to show her how many flowers she had strung. Saul lifted his high into the air and said, mine is as long as a beanstalk. Trisha laughs and says, a beanstalk? Saul smiles. Trisha continues to laugh and softly pinches Saul's cheek. This turns into a friendly back and forth exchange. And let me tell you, I wish you were all there, because it was the sweetest exchange, because you could just feel Saul just radiate so much happiness because he finally had a friend. Okay. And so after the couple weeks, Saul and Trisha worked together, but I also I'm going to expand his circle of friends. And so I started to pair Saul with other children. Right. And then he began to build the confidence, right? Because I noticed that his low self-esteem really kept him from engaging in experiences in the classroom, because he had low self-esteem. Right. I don't, he would say, this is the inner dialogue that he would tell himself, like, no one likes me. No one wants to play with me. I'm not good enough. And they do start that inner dialogue really, really early on. Okay, hold on for just a second. Sorry about that. Okay, and so if you see down here, especially if you're going to be working in the public sphere or with Head Start, you're going to be completing DRDP or the desired results developmental profile, and that's something that I've attached to every single piece of documentation that I've had in my career. Okay, so being intentional. Okay, so there is one other slide that I want to show you before I move on. And for some reason, I could not copy and paste it, but I'm going to show you now. So this is another slide or another image that I wanted to show you. This was at a different school. And again, relationships is something that I really value, and because it's so intrinsically intertwined with how well they do with thinking and learning. Okay. And so this is one of the ways that I use the environment as the third teacher, right? My co-teacher and I were very intentional with how we designed the environment. And I want you to notice how I'm being very intentional with not using the word decorating. Decorating is, to me, it's kind of like an empty word that doesn't hold meaning to the intent, the intentionality, and the seriousness of what we do as educators. So my co-teacher and I were very intentional about building relationships. And so what we did was, we decided to every morning play I don't know, you guys probably know I hope you know who the Beatles are, but the Beatles, they had this song called All You Need Is Love. And every morning, to kind of like set the tone in our class, we would play All You Need Is Love at circle time. And that was kind of like our call to the children to come and join us for circle time, right? And we would sing All You Need Is Love. And then, here is a mobile of the children and their families and the children with each other. And this helped to really create a sense of community, a sense of belonging, and just a sense of membership in our community, and to let everyone know that there's no room for meanness. There's no room for being, to be inconsiderate, right? And so this is something that my co-teacher and we really wanted to make sure that we included. And this is the first thing that a lot of our parents saw and a lot of our visitors saw upon coming into our classroom was this mobile, All You Need Is Love, right? And then the children felt a really strong sense of ownership to this, right? Did you have your hand up?
I'm sorry. No, I just wanted to say, so Heather had a very good question and you were just aiming on the curriculum. And the question is, what do you do when school does not support the individual teacher's approach? For example, at a Head Start that dictates curriculum and assessment?
That's a really good question. And a lot of teachers are up against that, right? And I was lucky enough to have a program director or a leader who is very progressive, and also he also shared the same philosophical values as the teachers that they hired. So this goes back to okay, so when you're first applying for jobs, and this is the mistake that I made. Especially when you're first starting off, when you're trying to get your first job, you kind of just apply wherever is open, right? To kind of get your feet in the door, right? You don't, because when you're in an interview, you don't realize that when you are in a program, not only are they interviewing you, but you are interviewing them as much as they are, right? And so you have to make sure that you not only are you a good fit for them, but is that program and that leader, how they approach curriculum in that early childhood program, are they a good fit for you? Because in my first couple of years of teaching, I was really lucky that I found programs that meshed really well with what my belief systems are. And granted, this was in the Bay Area, and in the Bay Area, they're like 10 light years ahead of everybody else when it comes to education, right? And so as a first year teacher, and more times than not, you do work in silos, meaning you're kind of on your own, right? And even though you're your program director or the school kind of like sets the quote unquote curriculum, you have a say about the culture in your school. Relationships, they are part of your curriculum, but they're, it's also part of the culture that you cultivate as your, or a way of, I like to think of culture as a way of being, right? It's just what you do, right? To be a good human being is that you cultivate that in your classroom. I don't think any good program director would say no, right? They're not going to say no, don't value, prioritize your relationships. But I think that any good director would realize the value in that. And so those are oops, sorry. Those are the types of things that you have to consider when you first go out into the teaching, as a first year teacher. Is the program a good fit for you, right? And let me tell you, there's a lot of programs out there, but the good ones are like a needle in a haystack. Okay, so you might have to interview many places to try to find the right fit for you. That's a really good question, Heather. Thank you. Are there any other questions, Yadira?
Nope. I'll keep you posted.
Okay. Oh, all right. Sorry. Let me just repost wait, where's my, okay. Now, I kind of want to get into relationships with the families before I get into the classroom environment. Now, sorry, so you saw the blurb that I shared with you. And so now I want to show you an example newsletter that I wrote. Okay, let me see. Can you guys see the newsletter? It's called Haifa's Happenings. Can you guys see that?
Yes, it's
okay,
showing.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, because I have my screen share. I can't see anyone raise your hands. So anyway, so transparency, you can't underestimate the value of transparency. But what I learned in the first year of teaching was the worst thing that you could say to a parent when they ask you how their child's day was is, I don't know, or I think it was good, right? That's the worst thing that you could say to a parent, because first of all, you're spending time with their child, right? And so they're going to expect you to be able to relay some information about how their day was and what they did. And so one of the things, and this is something that I learned in my undergrad, to write newsletters, right? To write newsletters or to have a social media page that's approved by your program director. Okay. But this is an example of a newsletter that I would do this on a weekly basis. Okay. I would include pictures of the children doing things. And also I would provide updates about what, curriculum updates about what we were about to do and what we were focusing on, different reminders about things that are going on around the school. And then also inquiry questions that the teachers could ask at home. So questions to ask your child this week. What special thing did Miss Janice discover on her walk, and what's Felix's cousin's name, right? And so that's just kind of like conversation starters that families can ask over the dinner table. So this is something that I didn't do my first year, but I actually learned and I realized, I was like, oh, like I was looking back at my undergrad work, and I remember one of my professors made us create this newsletter, and I was like, why don't I do a newsletter, right? Instead of sending a cajillion emails to parents every day. And so like I said, transparency, that's something that I learned probably the second or third year, because in your first year, you are, like I said, it's a whole process of trial and error, and you're getting to know your children, you're getting to know your families. And in my first year, I would make a point to like show up to school a half an hour early so that I could set up and then also greet the families like, hey, Mr. Robinson, how are you doing? And try to greet every parent by their first name or their last name so that I remember like, oh yes, this is so-and-so's dad, or this is so-and-so's mom, right? It's the little things that, that really made a difference. And that also really helped with kind of like nurturing the relationships with the families. One thing that I will say that I was not prepared for in my first year was navigating conflict with families. And I'm not, and I never had, it wasn't like any confrontations, I never had any bad conflict with parents, but something that I was really naive about in my first year was, if there's an issue with a child, you got to bring it up right away. Right. And so because I was, trying to get used to the rhythm of things, and because you're constantly multitasking. That's something else I had to learn on the job is multitask, right? So, because right when you get to work, you have to set everything up, and then you have to greet the parents, and then you have to do circle time, and you have to keep in constant communication with your co-teacher, right? And so multitasking, and then also just building that rapport. And don't expect your classroom to look perfect the first year, because what happens is in your first year, you inherit the previous teacher's classroom, and you inherit it in the condition that they left it in. And so when I came in as a new teacher, I inherited really rocky relationships. The parents didn't trust the previous teacher. And so as a new teacher in the school, they didn't have a lot of trust in me. They were really weary of me. They were kind of like, who is this, new teacher coming in and, taking over this classroom? And so, I had to learn the hard way, and sometimes parents will project their anger onto you unfairly. But, the best thing that I learned in my first year, and luckily I had been really self-aware, is just to listen to them, because that's all they really want you to do, is just to listen to them. And when it comes to your co-teachers, this is something that I learned is, like I said, your co-teacher is kind of like, you're kind of like in a marriage with your co-teacher, and you don't get to choose who your co-teacher is. You're just paired with whoever the teacher is in that classroom. You don't get to say, I don't really, really like this teacher. Can I go work with the other one who I seem to get? No. I mean, sometimes your program director might listen to you, but a lot, like in my experience, whoever I was paired with, I just had to deal with it, right? I had to learn how to work with my co-teacher. And in my 15 years of being in early childhood, I probably had only 2 co-teachers that I worked really well with. Okay. So just to give you an idea of kind of like, that's even like very, it's kind of rare to find someone. And so, to be an educator, you also have to have good interpersonal skills, right? To get along and work well with other people, right? All right. So moving on to the classroom environment, I know I kind of jabber on too long, but the classroom environment and the curriculum. So like I said, the classroom environment is part of the curriculum. And so this is a quote from Loris Malaguzzi, who is the founder of the Reggio Emilia approach. And Loris Malaguzzi said, "Stand aside for a while and leave room for learning. Observe carefully what children do. And then if you have understood well, perhaps teaching will be different than it was before." And because I was really solid in my teaching philosophy, and I was really heavily influenced by the Reggio Emilia approach, I used his book as kind of like a Bible for me, right? And so I came into my first year of teaching as a reflective practitioner. And so that's what I implore all of you to do, is begin to reflect on your work. Okay. It was hard to do the first year. I actually kept a journal, and I actually kept it, and I found it a couple years ago. And I remember I kept a first year of teaching journal. And one of the things that I did is I wrote down all of the good things that I saw and the not so great things that the type of teacher I wanted to be, by observing my other co-teachers. And so keeping a journal, kind of like tracking your evolution of who you are, is really important. So when it comes to curriculum, one of the things that was a lifesaver in my first year of teaching was having a ton of sensory experiences out. This is cornstarch and water. Put in a tub, put it out, you know. And here's another thing about being a first-year teacher. You got to get used to being okay with messes. Early childhood is messy. Get used to it, okay? So sensory experiences are really, they're a game changer because they really engage children for long periods of time, and it's really therapeutic for them. When it comes to like you know, self-regulation and literacy, this is something that I saw in my practicum class, doing for my practicum teachers, is create different learning literacy experiences for them to write. So I created this family. So the house area I call the family living area was a really popular area in my classroom. And so I had to create a sign-up sheet. And this is the perfect way to practice their handwriting. And so notice how this little boy or little child, how he holds the pencil. So this is, I think he was 4 at the time. And typically children at age 4 should be holding it in a tripod grasp. And so just embedding these different opportunities for them to practice their reading, or I'm sorry, their writing skills or fine motor ability, you know, you can embed that in different parts of the classroom. So sign up sheets to, you know, a wait list was something that I integrated. Oops. Stringing together, you know, natural materials that you found on your walk, that helps with fine motor ability, right? And I always tell parents, this is really important. If you want your child to learn how to pick up a pen and write their name, you know, you told me, Miss Janice, I want my child to learn how to write their first and last name, then embed these types of fine fine motor experiences for them. And then this was, we wanted to label the different areas in the classroom. So I had children label the different areas. So this is what this little boy named Cohen, he labeled the color jar area, right? We also had children sort letters. Okay, this is also classification, right? Organizing, categorizing, right? That's related to mathematical learning, right? And then also, because this is a Reggio-based program, we used real materials. And this is the one thing that I took from, because I was so strongly inspired by the Reggio Emilia approaches. They emphasize using real materials. And I want to preface this by, I didn't just let them just put it out there and have a free for all. We taught the children how to safely use the hammer and nails. And this was over the course of like weeks before we felt comfortable with putting them out, right? And so this is something that maybe not in your first year, but probably after you kind of like get your bearings and get used to the flow and the culture of your classroom, you feel more well established. This is something, but fine motor activity is really important. Okay, so I know I have about 9 minutes left of my presentation, but really quickly, I wanted to show you an example of an investigation that I did in my internship in grad school. And this is something that we call this the project approach. And we use the child's interest in art and my interest in art by Dale Chihuly. And so this investigation was really inspired by the teacher, right? And so this is the thing about what first-year teachers don't know, especially if you're in a traditional program, is that you can create curriculum based on what inspires you, right? Especially if you're in a play-based, project-based type of program. And so I remember I went to the Dale Chihuly exhibit in San Francisco, and I was super inspired by his work. And so I brought his work back to the classroom and I said, hey, this is Dale. And so Dale Chihuly is a glass blower. And so he's very well known around the world for his glass blowing. And so I brought a couple of books and I kind of shared it with the children. And the children were so inspired by it that I began to bring out different, mediums for them to create. So I brought out color pencils and paper, and, every day at nap time. And this was an investigation that happened over the course of, I think, 2 months, right? And so they studied his work every day after nap time. If you could see my voice recorder, I would record their conversations and I would build curriculum around their interest around Dale Chihuly's glass blowing work. And this particular, it's called the Temple of the Sun. This was something that the children were really drawn to. And so, and the reason why I knew that they were drawn to it is because their conversations began to center around the Temple of the Sun, right? And this is a conversation that I had with the children after we looked at Chihuly's artwork. And so, some of the things that they said were fire, sun, and moon. I think that's an octopus burning the whole planet around the world. I think those are balloons and jet fires. I think that's electricity that helps the moon go all the way around the whole world. And then Lucas says, I think that they're plants. So, we have this conversation, this thread of conversation about their theories about what that represents, right? And so here's the thing with art, and this is what I wanted the children to understand about art, is that it's interpretive. You don't, just because someone says it's, this, it doesn't mean that that's what it is, because it's interpretive, right? It's open-ended. And so going along with my value of relationships, I connected our study of Chihuly's work with feelings, with emotions, right? I connected it back to our focus on social emotional learning. So we talked about, what do you feel when you look at this picture, right? And Gabby said, this makes her feel mad, and this makes her feel happy and sad. And Julian said, that makes me feel angry, and it makes me feel happy. Lucas said, it makes me feel mad, and that makes me feel happy. So, what I, sharing this particular documentation, what I want you to get from that is that children, they're already keen observers of art, right? They're very, they're very theoretical and philosophical, right? And so, but we don't know that unless we kind of slow down and take them seriously as learners. And so this is just another picture of this little child drawing a picture of Chihuly. And then we invited a grandmother in to read another Chihuly book, right? And then she also brought some glass mosaic balls, to kind of go along with what we did. More drawing. And then we decided, let's bring in some wire, right? So we did with paint, we did it with color pencils now, and then we decided to bring in some wire to see what they would do with it. And so this is what they created based on the Temple of the Sun, and they renamed it the Temple of Fire. Okay. So what I want to say as a first-year teacher is that curriculum doesn't always happen in a linear way. And, don't be afraid to think outside the box. And in my first year, I was really kind of like, I need to stay with what the curriculum says, what my program director says. But here's the thing, if you have a program director who understands child development and who really genuinely honors and respects children, they're going to go with a more open-ended approach. And in early childhood, it should be open-ended. It should be focused on child-inspired interests, right? And it should always be centered around play. So I think that's the end. I think I have about 4 minutes, and I haven't been really checking out the chat box. And so do we have some time?
Don't worry, you've been good. Can I be your student?
Yeah.
Can I be your student?
Oh. So funny.
He's so great.
Well, thank
Janice. I'm like in awe in all the experiences you've had to share.
Well, it's over, it's when I created this presentation, it was really based on what I recall and kind of like lessons learned. And I hope all of you took something meaningful, and I hope that helps inform what you do as an early childhood educator, because it is serious work. And, I think the first thing that we, or I think that what we need to, what people need to do is just value our profession and take it more seriously, right? And so I'm just looking through the chat box. I don't think there's any questions.
No, there's no questions. It was go ahead.
Janice, is there a time when you should promote yourself from teacher assistant to lead teacher? Is there a time frame that should happen after graduation?
It really depends on your comfort level. If you just graduated and you don't have a lot of experiences, some people might say, yeah, go for it, because then you learn on the job. But I think that to kind of like help you get used to and kind of like get your feet on the ground and to learn about what the responsibilities are. Because a lot of times you're just thrown in the classroom, right? You know, I think it depends on your comfort level and how prepared you feel. So if you've graduated and you already have a wealth of experience, and yeah, go for it, go get a lead teacher position. But I know that there's some students who, you know, I've had some students in my class who have taken on lead teacher positions, and it's just too overwhelming. It's a lot of responsibility and they're just not prepared for it. Because, you know, the responsibilities of an assistant teacher are different from a lead teacher. And so I think it depends on your comfort level and how prepared you feel.
I think Wendy Bervila has her hand up.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
just had a question. You mentioned that the curriculum, it was teacher inspired, but I thought for Reggio Emilia, the has to be children inspired. So were you referring to like outside of Reggio Emilia or in general?
So absolutely. So in Reggio Emilia, they believe that the child leads the curriculum, but they also believe in the teacher as what they call a researcher. And we also we also have the responsibility of creating provocations to help inspire interest. And so I brought in what I was inspired by, and I paired that with the children's interest with art, right? And so they were, you know, I wanted to introduce like 4D, right? And 3D art, right? And so, and I felt that, you know, bringing in my interest in Chihuly's artwork would be a great way to kind of like introduce different mediums and kind of like run with their interest in art experiences, if that makes sense. But, you know, in Reggio Emilia, they value the educator as well. They value teachers and children working side by side and working together. And they really view the teacher and the child as researcher as well.
Okay, understand. Gracias. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. That's a good question.
Janice, there was a question on the chat that I answered, but I don't know if you have a better answer. And the question was this: do you need a certificate or associate degree in order to be a preschool teacher?
I think you have to have, you have to have a permit, because the permit indicates that you've taken out the required child development courses. But, you know, if you have an AA degree or a BA degree, you're going to have more job opportunity, like options, right? So I hope that answered your question.
And I think it's also depending on the center. Some centers, if they're private or if they're public, I think they're Head Start or you know, just in the school systems, because there's some Head Starts in the school districts. They require you to have a state permit. So at least an associate teacher permit or an assistant teacher permit. But if it's private, my experience has been, you know, some privates, they might not need it. So I think it depends on the institution that you're going to be teaching at. But like I said, it's highly recommended for your own well-being and for you to have better opportunities and better pay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Isabella. Thank you for coming. So if you haven't done so, I see a lot of people have already, but please go ahead and put your first and last name in the chat box along with your email so that I could send you your professional development certificate. You're welcome. Thank you for joining. Thank you.
Wow, this was such a great workshop. Janice, we had 63 students.
I know. Yay.
Janice, also, just so you know, there's another workshop that's going for another 30 minutes right now. If people want to jump over, Doug